Recently, I took a break from social media and from work. I took a sabbatical from work because I was like, I needed to replenish. We have a saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. And as a person who does people work, I always think it's important that when I feel empty or I need to replenish, I do what I need to do to get myself back up, and fill back up, because I don't ever want to serve people from a hurt place or an empty place, because then I end up not actually helping, but end up doing more harm than good. And so I took some time away, and I'm so grateful that I did. But when I did that, one of the things that I did was I went by one of my childhood homes. So I actually moved around a lot. And so when people ask me, where's home? What's home? And that question used to frustrate me so much because I didn't really know what to say. A part of me wanted to say Philly because I was born here and raised here, and was where I spent most of my life, and where all of my family is, and where my parents are from, and where they were raised, but I didn't want to take away from those who've been here their whole lives. But then also, I didn't see myself being from anywhere else. And so that question used to always fluster me. But there's one home in particular where I had most of my childhood memories were in that house. And the unfortunate part is that many of those memories weren't positive. And so when we left that house, I had vowed that I would never go back. But one morning, something, and I believe it was the spirit, but something said, you know what, Tania, just go back and visit. And I remember I drove there, and you know how you don't think, and mind you, I've lived in different cities, so every city has an MLK Boulevard, right? Jay-Z said, I'm good on any MLK Boulevard, okay, Beyonce, Jay-Z, right? Because I've been to so many, but I'm really bad with directions. I know landmarks. I remember, I have a photographic memory, but don't ask me about what block, what street, what number. I'm gonna go, what? Because I've had to learn and navigate so many different roads. But I started to drive, and at first I didn't think I knew where I was going, but it was almost it was almost memory. I just knew eventually. I remember I pulled up in front of, I drove past the park that I played in. I remember just those memories of being bullied and doing some bullying and all of it. Some things made me laugh, some things didn't. But then I pulled up in front of the house, and I got out, and I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know why I was there. It was super early in the morning. I think I only seen one person outside. But I just got out, and I just looked at the house, and I just burst into tears, thinking about all the things that happened there. And just my childhood just flashed before my eyes. I mentioned before, my mother remarried after me when she remarried my younger sister's father. And that changed the course of my family, us as individuals, and even as a family forever. And it was very domestic. It was full of abuse. The unfortunate part is that I am not the only one, but I've been a victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, sexual abuse, a lot of things. But that house had so many of those negative memories. And so I was just sitting there crying. I was thinking about, I was trying to remember, trying to find the good things. I'm God, why am I here? I remember one memory in particular, or two. One, I remember we had gotten the Sega Genesis, and that's how old I am. I ain't that old. But we had the, Sega Genesis, and I remember one day, him and my mother constantly, he was a drinker, and they were constantly arguing. Whenever he would get angry, he would beat her and us. I remember I was closing my eyes. I remember, he broke her nose and her wrist and her foot and her arm. It was just all bad. I remember one time he was so mad that he ripped the Sega Genesis out of the socket and he threw it out the window. And so I was looking at the sidewalk and I remember how embarrassed we were and how upset my brother was when we saw that Sega Genesis all crushed up on the side of on the sidewalk, and all the glass that used to be there from just them throwing stuff and just a lot. There's one memory in particular that I'll never forget, because I couldn't even be no more than 10. I was definitely younger than 10 years old, but he had gotten so mad. And mind you, we were not biologically his, even though we had his last name. And so whenever he was mad, he made it clear that we were not his children, not his real ones, at least. But when he was really angry one day and he started burning pictures of us. He was grabbing a picture. My mom used to, when we were younger, my mom loved pictures. I don't remember the last time. She hates them now, but there was a time when she loved pictures, and so he was taking the pictures and he was burning them. He would light them on fire, but even worse is that at first he was throwing them in a trash can, but then he started throwing them on the floor. And the carpet caught on fire. And I remember we were crying, my sisters were crying, everybody was yelling. My mom was like, Tania, call 911. And you know how you read? I love to read. If you never met me and never knew me, I love to read. And so like I have a very colorful vocabulary, but I have a very vivid imagination. And like, you know, that you hear and people say, you know, I was paralyzed with fear. And I don't know if anybody's ever been paralyzed with fear, but that's the first time I can remember really being paralyzed with fear. Because there was fire and everyone was crying and a part of me was scared. A part of me didn't want anyone to get hurt, but a part of me also didn't want anyone to get in trouble either. And my mom's like, Tania, I kept saying like, call 911, and I froze, and then I tried to call and I wasn't making any sense. My sister snatched the phone and she took over for me, but it was just like, I'm sitting in front of that house and I remembered like, I was a kid and it just brought back so many negative memories. I was crying and I was angry. I went on the back. I remember, you know, we had a basement and it was unfinished, but that was like, I always had a thing where I was the middle child and all that like I was only one of many things that happened, and a lot of I think it all had an effect on my siblings and me in different ways, but because my other siblings, I had two older siblings, I know that it had a different effect on them because of their maturity level, and a lot of it I didn't understand just yet, but they did. And so on top of all of that chaos, we had to also deal with all of their stuff and their processing as well. And then my little sister was the baby of the family. I was the middle child, and because I was the smart, I was considered like the nerd and the smart one in the family, and I was the middle child. A lot of times people always assumed that I was okay. I didn't say anything, so I was always okay. And because we were always dealing with somebody's stuff, if it wasn't my parents, it was one of my siblings, I never wanted to rock the boat. I never wanted people to know what I was going through. I didn't want to add to the chaos. And so a lot of times I just kept to myself, and I would bury my face in books, or I had a tendency, like, I would go into the basement. I would always try to find my little corner where I would listen to music, or, I love my headphones. Most people will tell you, like, if I was a fire today and I had to grab 5 things, one of them would be headphones and an iPod or some sort of music device. At that time, it was a tape player. and a CD player. But that's how I drowned out, like, between music and books was how I drowned out all of the chaos in the world. I actually will tell a secret that I've never shared with anybody. And that is that I wet the bed. I was a bedwetter until I was about 12. And it wasn't until I went to therapy, like in my adult years, that I realized it came from nightmares. I used to have nightmares and night terrors. I would wet the bed. And I would get spanked for it and disciplined for it. Mind you, meantime, so if you were a bedwetter, no, don't be ashamed. It's not your a bladder issue. It may be tied to a mental or emotional challenge that you were having, but I went to bed till like 12. And I just came from just unaddressed trauma. And so I was sitting in front of their house, and I remember, and I was having flashbacks, not only of the things that happened in the house, but just even after we left, how those memories and those nightmares haunted us and haunted me. And mind you, eventually, my mom and my sisters, we left, and we got out of there. I remember another moment in particular, where, I love to watch I love everything Black, child. From Black Santa to Black books, Black movies, Black culture, I love it. When I went to HBCU, I love and pride myself on being a Black woman. And I remember one of my favorite movies is What's Love Got to Do with It? Tina Turner. And we had watched that movie. Love Tina, by the way. And I said that. After the movie was over, I had said, oh man, I wish Tina Turner was my mom. And when I tell you, I watched my mom's face like break. And when I said it, mind you, I was so young. I didn't know what I was, how when you're young and, kids just say anything. And I was a kid, I was just saying anything. And I was really, when I meant it, I think now as an adult, the adult me wants to explain. But I was saying it because I admired her strength. And I saw her story and how she powered through and how she believed in herself and how she still stuck through her dream and how she fought back. That was inspiring, especially when you know my history and our childhood trauma. But when I said it, I wasn't trying to take away from my mother. But she was so hurt. And I remember for weeks, if I were to ask her she wouldn't talk to me. Like, she did not talk to me. If I would ask her for something, she would say, ask Tina. Or she would say, call Tina. That's your mom, right? Call her. And she would do it. And like, everyone thought it was funny at first, but it wasn't funny to me because even though I did, and I didn't know it was resentment until later on in life. But even though I held feelings about my mom, she was still my mom, and I loved her, and she was the most important person to me. And especially after dealing with my own sense of abandonment from my father, I'm like, I can't lose my mommy too. And I remember it wasn't until I actually freaked out and burst into tears that her and my siblings stopped teasing me. But I'll never forget the look on my mom's face. And I seen it again later down the line in life because just it came out in moments where my resentment for her came out. It's interesting because I think because my fathers, both of them, weren't around to blame. And I think many of us, when we feel negative feelings, especially when we're children, because we didn't ask to be there. Nobody asked to be here. And so I think as a child, you want to hold someone accountable. I think we have a tendency to want to find logic and to make sense of everything that happens in our life. And sometimes some things you'll never know why something happened. That's why I always say, that why sometimes is the wrong question to ask. It should be what versus why. But many of us are scrambling for why. And so I was always scrambling. I'm somebody who I was always scrambling for why. And in doing that, I didn't realize how much I resented my mother and how much blame I put on my mother for my childhood trauma, or our childhood trauma. Because it was like I never understood like why we stayed so long and why we didn't leave. And, you know, I blamed her for everything. I didn't tell her that because I loved her. But I didn't realize how that was also that one of those unresolved feelings that I had, resentment towards her. And I ain't gonna lie, I judged her. And I said things like, I would never do that. And I remember distinctly one time she was like, you know, I forgot what happened and what I said, but she was just like, me, when did you get to be so cold? She actually used the word cold, which is interesting because, you know, my partner now, he used to say vicious. Like, and I think, you know, some people call me the B word, and she was just like, when did you get that way? Because I was never that way. I was actually very sensitive when I was younger. But it came from just all of this built up anger. Like, I didn't have to be here. I didn't understand why my life, like why I had to be born into this family, why I had to go through those things, and why I had to be a victim to those things. And I blamed her and I judged her. And I had made a silent promise, because I think we do that a lot. We don't tell other people, but we say, I'll never do that, and that could never be me. And we say, you know, I'm never going to do that to my kids, and I'm never going to do this. And I had said that to myself. And I had said, you know, and I think that was my motivation. I didn't want to. She was at one point she was my hero, and I was like, I didn't want to end up like that. And I judged her. And I always tell people, you know, be mindful. Because karma is a mother. Literally talking about mothers, but karma is a mother, because it will definitely teach you and humble something, and it's definitely a boomerang because it always comes back. And it's interesting because, you know, and you never say never, because the same thing that you're judging somebody for comes back around. And Lord knows that boomerang hit me in my face when I ended up in my own domestic violence relationship. And it's crazy because you never see it coming. I think people make a lot of comments and they make a lot of judgments about people who subject themselves to abuse. But no one knowingly, and I'm going to say this and I'm going to stand on it, but I don't believe that no one or anyone goes into relationships expecting the person who they love and who they feel or believe loves them. They don't go into it knowing that they're going to be a victim of abuse. And so when I hear, you know, it's interesting because when it happened, the first person I wanted to tell was my mother, but I felt guilty because of all the resentment that I held against her for so long and the things that I had said about her and I felt about her in my head. Never said them out loud. I would never disrespect her in that way, but the things that I had said to myself when I was alone, you know, I felt like it all came rushing back to me. And I felt so ashamed and I felt guilty. I couldn't tell her. And so I told the next best thing, which was my best friend at the time. And this was somebody who was in college. So this is somebody who literally we were thick as thieves. You would rarely see me without her. And I remember I told her, and I will never, to this day, I will never forget what she said to me. She said, will you be dumb if you stay? Mind you, it's something that I've been holding on to for a while. Like, I didn't tell anybody immediately. It was after we had a couple of incidents, and it was like, okay, this is not a game, you know, and I was going through my own things, but that's what she said to me. The first person that I chose to confide in, she said, you'd be dumb if you stay. And my heart was already broken, and all the things that I was already feeling, that felt like another brick, another weight on my chest, and it broke my heart. And, you know, it was very humbling because it was like, I got it. The same thing that you give out, it come back. and it pulls no punches, and it felt just like that. A punch in my gut. And even I don't think she even realized what she said. I think sometimes when people say and do things, and even when it happened, when I started to share, I've heard all kinds of things. People have called me a liar. I've had friends go, why didn't you tell me? And it's like, that's one of the things. Like, that's the reason why people don't tell. It's because sometimes, whether you believe it or not, and just because you think that you're the best person to tell, you might not be. A lot of times when people are victims of abuse, we're already feeling like I didn't need anybody to tell me that I was dumb or that I was stupid or that I was weak, because I was already telling myself those things. And you want people to support you, to make you feel like you don't want anybody to tell you. Like, we know what we can do, but it ain't that simple. And mind you, my friend, she didn't mean, I don't think she genuinely meant to be malicious, because she grew up in a 2-parent household. She never had to work. We just had different lifestyles. And so she was only speaking out of a place where, from which she could understand and from what she knew from her lens. So I couldn't be mad at her, but I damn sure didn't need it. Especially because I wasn't stupid. And if I could have made a clean, easy break, I would have, but I didn't. I had made the mistake of becoming a dependent. We had intertwined our lives. We were living together. We were sharing a vehicle. We worked together. Like, literally, everything was together. And because I never anticipated this happening, I wasn't the best money manager, so I didn't have my money saved. I didn't have a plan, and so it wasn't a clean break. I had to still get to work. I had to still figure out my life. I had to be able to pay my bills. I had to be able to do things. I didn't prepare for that. On top of being, I guess what you call, some will say I hate the term popular, because what's popular and what's cool these days, or ever. But I was a social influencer at that time, and I had prided myself on keeping my business private. And I didn't want that to be out and to be another thing for people to have something to say about, because it always seemed like somebody had something to say. I didn't want that to happen. Plus, the person that I chose, my confidant, if she thought I was a dummy, I could only imagine what other people would think. And mind you, people didn't know, like, I did everything I could, child. I pretended to be broke. I sold Jordans. Like, I was a big sneakerhead. And so there were several times, one when I had to move to Nebraska, another time when I always say, if you're going to buy something, buy quality and be prepared to sell it if you ever need to, okay? I even sold plasma. I always say, like, listen, you ain't been broke if you ain't never sold plasma. And I'm playing, but I'm serious. But if you ain't never sold plasma, you ain't never been broke, child. Okay, I was in pawn shops. I was not eating. I was trying to scrape every single penny that I had so I can get my own car, and so I can do it. And I was just so, I needed to do it, and so I think sometimes those who are victims, and not the victims, I want to start saying survivors of abuse, because I'm not a victim, I'm a survivor of abuse. We get a bad rap of, you're dumb, you're this, you're not. And I'll be the one to say you're not. I am not, my mother is not, and I put my foot in my mouth when I used to say that mentally and feel that about her, because I can only imagine what it's like to have to, all I had to worry about was myself and a pit bull that wasn't even mine. But my mom had to deal with all of those feelings and all of those things on top of worrying about the well-being of children, and that, a lot of us, sometimes we speak on things and we're judging people and we're saying stuff and you don't know what the hell you're talking about. And I say that as somebody who did it. I did it. And you know what? Again, God uses everything, and mind you, I think sometimes we give the devil too much credit, and we give, we put too much on God. God didn't do that to me, and Satan didn't do that to me. That was me happening to me. I made those choices. I made those decisions. But the great thing about God is that he works everything out for my good. And that taught me valuable lessons. Number one, I learned, to be independent. I have, even my partner now, like, I've had men who struggle with, they don't understand why I'm so independent. It's because I never want to put myself in that position again where if I need to go, if I'm in danger, and I need to be able to get the hell out of there. And men never understood that, so they thought I was just being too tough and too independent. And it wasn't that. It was that I never wanted to put myself in that position again. And so I learned the importance of, as a woman, having my own, so that I will always have the power to choose and to go if I needed to go. I learned that number two, and this is like what I call it, one of my Homegirl Chronicles. And that comes from these are like, I feel like, hey, we are currently living history, and if they're gonna write a Bible, this is my chapter, child. You know what I'm saying? This is the urbanized version of Ruth, right? Of, thou shalt mind the business that payeth thee, and that you got to stop speaking on things that you don't know about. At the end of the day, never say never, because you don't know what you would do. And until you've had fires in front of you, until you've had guns in your face, until you've had people put their hands on you, until you've ever been in those situations, you have no right, absolutely no right to speak on those things. When I look at them, Meg Thee Stallion and her story, and just the comments that people leave, it's like, who do you think you are? Like, that's not your place. As somebody who's been there, you have no right. You have no right. And I think, just like me, don't ever think that you are above karma, that you are above it coming back on you, because I can guarantee you, if it's not in the form of abuse, I don't want to wish this on anybody, but there's probably some things that you said that you would never do, and situations that you said you would never be in, that you ended up in. And the last thing that you want to hear is somebody calling you dumb or stupid or making you feel any worse than you already feel. If I hear one more canceling, who are you to cancel? You can't cancel me, child. I'm pretty sure on this, I'm gonna probably say things that offend a whole lot of people, but I don't give a damn, because you can't cancel me. Who do you think you are? We are all human, and we're all out here figuring it out, and I don't blame anybody, because, listen, hurt people, and he was hurting. And I think that was one of the reasons why I never reported him, because I don't feel like prison is the answer for every crime. I'm not saying that I don't believe in prison at all, but some people aren't bad people. They just, sometimes good people do bad things, and sometimes hurt people. And I didn't want to be another thing to add onto his hurt. And so I don't speak to him. I don't know. I don't speak to either of them, my stepfather or my ex-boyfriend. They're probably the only two people who I have learned to forgive, but forgiving doesn't mean that I have to allow you back in my life or open myself up to that again. But I pray that if you are a victim, number one, I want you to know that number one, you aren't a victim, you are a survivor. And you are not any of those things. You are actually a warrior. I used to love, me and my sister, we love Xenon, the warrior, the warrior princess. You are a warrior, baby. And it's not even just for women, because I know that men are also and can be victims of abuse or survivors of abuse. And if you were a survivor, and you are a survivor of abuse, my hat, I don't have a hat on today, but my hat goes off to you, because people can say what they want, but until you've been in that thing and you know what that feels like, you have no idea the strength and the fortitude it takes to overcome it. And if you are still living, and if you are still breathing, and if you still have the heart and the mind to love and to care and to show up, you survived. And that is a blessing. And that is a blessing. I hope that it never happens to you, but if it doesn't, and if you've been a person who has had something to say, you hush. And if you don't have nothing nice to say, don't say nothing. Because like that sign says behind me, it is cool to be kind. And if you ain't gonna be kind, cut it out. Because the world don't need no more hate. And those who are suffering don't need any more people adding to it. Because Lord knows I did. And to anybody who I have hurt while I was hurting, in any way, from the bottom of my heart, I'm sorry. And I hope it never happens again. To you or me. And a special note to my mother. I know it's 20 years later, but I want you to know that I would never, I wouldn't trade you for the world. Because everything that I am is because of you. And just like Tina Turner and other survivors of abuse, maybe everybody else doesn't know your full story, but I do. And the fact that you have gone through all that you've gone through and you still found it in your heart to put up with us and our crap, and you showed up every single day. I wouldn't ask for another mother, and I love you so much for it. And I'm able to be as strong as I am, and and I have a desire to want to give back to other women and other men who are victims of abuse because of you. And I'm sorry if for anything I may have thought or felt, but more importantly, anything that I may have said or done that made you feel otherwise, because you are a rock star. And you are still and forever will be my hero.